Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight, with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio, your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Get ready for Talking Heads, the show where expert insights meet world-class education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. Brought to you by USA Global TV and Radio. Meet our distinguished presenters. From the great state of Texas, longevity expert, award-winning author, publisher, and distinguished Toastmaster, Red O'Loughlin. From London, England, soul heart awakener, novelist, vocal coach, and artist, Dr. Madeline Chan. Also from England, the Harley Street stress expert, therapist, ambassador for peace, and speaker, Carolyn Heward. And from Australia, ICF PCC credentialed coach, entrepreneur, and leadership coach, Mariska Dupria. Experience their expertise, connect with their wisdom, and transform your perspective. Watch Talking Heads on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. This video and its contents are the property of USA Global TV and Radio. All rights reserved. Terms and conditions apply. Visit usaglobaltv.com for more details.
Hello, USA Global TV and Radio. Welcome and welcome back to all of you, whether you are joining the show for the very first time or whether you are returning to get some more hope, inspiration, and learnings. And as you know, you are on a Talking Head show, with me, Mariska Dupria, and we are going to delve into a little bit of a growth conversation today and understanding why we might be, for ourselves or our team members and employees, struggling to get people to grow, and what might be some of those hidden barriers that causes some of these things. So to get us started off today, we are looking at three main buckets within that space. So basically, we're going to look at external factors that influence it. We are going to look at some internal factors that influence it. Ourselves. And then we are going to look at something that's a little bit of a combination of both. So to start us off, typically we have a tendency to say, well, it is out there, and that's why I might not be learning and doing all the things that I can possibly be doing. It is not helping me, whatever the thing is that is coming up. So let's look at that. So externally, what is it that is within that space? And of course, there might be a load more, and we are taking the top three that has been shown typically comes up most. So the first one for external factors is clarity. Now, when you think about clarity for yourself within your own working space, if we know exactly what it is that we need to do, it is easy to do said thing. If, however, there is ambiguity in whatever shape or form, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So when we think of clarity, what is it that we need to take into consideration? Well, first off, we need to make sure that the employees, as well as ourselves as leaders, are very clear on what direction we are taking. Now, yes, in our modern day and age, there's loads of times where we might not have all the clarity that is required within the strategy that we have, or things might be changing. There might be mergers and acquisitions happening. The organization itself might be changing and restructuring for whatever reason. And it might feel like some of that direction is lacking. So it is really important in the clarity element to make sure that we are sure or have some idea what the direction is. We don't need to have a pinpoint idea, but at least more or less this is this direction that we are following is very helpful, because that then goes into what's the goals that we have? What is it that we are trying to achieve? And that then goes into, okay, me as an individual, whether I'm a team member or whether I'm a leader, how am I contributing to that? And what's the impact that I'm having on this bigger picture? So you can start to see why contribution and clarity, especially clarity, is very important, because if I'm not clear, how do I contribute? It makes it very difficult to contribute. And if I don't know what it is that I'm contributing, how then do I grow? Well, that makes it really difficult to grow as well, except if I want to grow into a different place and move into a different organization, then I might have personal clarity as how to do that. But for my organization, I might not. So as a leader, one of the things that we need to make sure that we bring to the table is to articulate our direction, the goals for both the team as well as the individual, and then being very articulate about the clarity of what the contribution and impact is that this individual has for the team as well as for the bigger organization, and potentially even beyond that, right? Because as an organization, we are performing a function in the wider world, in our wider system. So understanding what that is helps all of us as leaders, as well as those we lead, so our team members and other employees. So that's the first one in external. Of course, internally, we can do all of that ourselves. It may or may not align with the bigger organization. So hence why I put this one on the external. The organization needs to come up with the direction. And yes, when I say organization, we as leaders need to be able to do that. Then the next one on our external factors is psychological safety. Now, I've alluded to the fact that we are going to speak a little bit about psychological safety today in one of our Women's Prerogative conversations. And I have a whole episode only dedicated to psychological safety. Now, when we look at psychological safety, especially for us to grow as human beings, whether it is you as a leader or your team, it's really around creating a space where it is safe for us to experiment, to fail, and to learn. So we want to be able to experiment. And in experimentation, if you think back to when you were in school, and hopefully you did some form of experimentation in school, we don't always know what will happen, right? Hence why it is an experiment. We have a hypothesis. We have a plus minus idea what we think might happen, but we don't really know until we try it out. Now, this thing might work really well, or it might blow up in our face. Now, psychological safety is an environment in which we can try something in a safe space. When we experiment, we do this in a laboratory before we take it out into the field, because we can control more of the parameters. And that's the same thing at work. We need to have an environment, a safe space in which we can try things out and see how they work, controlling the parameters as far as possible, which is a little bit difficult because we are working with human beings, and then take it out into the field. Right. So it is about that experimentation. Now, if I only expect my experiment to always work, it means that I won't be ready for any failures, and I won't want to have any failures, and I don't feel necessarily safe to have any failures. So the failures part, really, really important, because we learn through failing. We learn what doesn't work. And sometimes something might seem like it works the first time. The second time, same thing happens. But the third time it fails for, well, nobody knows why. And then we need to go back to the drawing board. So failure is actually a very constant thing that happens. And we need to ensure as leaders that we create that safe space, psychological safety, for our team in which they can experiment, fail, and then learn from it, right? We don't want to have retribution because of the failure. That will eliminate your psychological safety almost immediately, and it will also cause the team not to want to learn, which also results in them not growing. So the last one within our external factors is the incentive or recognition part of growing and learning. So when you think about your organization, the environment you are in, you will have KPIs. What exactly is it that your KPIs are looking at? And when you think about those KPIs, do they incentivize you as a leader, you as the team, to grow and to learn? Or do they penalize you when you learn and you grow? So understanding how our incentive system and our recognition system works towards us learning and growing also has a very big impact on whether people will step into that space or not. So some of the research that I found was on Gallup, where they noticed that 43% of employees engage in learning when it is tied to a promotion. So if they know that they have a higher likelihood of being promoted when they do some form of learning, they will engage in it more. As well as the fact that only 29% of organizations officially recognize any learning we do. So think about your organization. How is that structured? And maybe the way that we have it structured might be impeding the type of learning and growing that we see within our teams and even for ourselves as leaders. Then, of course, we have the internal factors. So when we look at the internal factors, there again, we have three different things that we will be looking at. The first is the fear of failure. As I mentioned before, within the psychological safety space, fear of failure and lack of confidence, definitely big problem. Then we also have the matching of our roles and our skills. So that could also, for us as individuals, prevent us from learning or stepping into those spaces. And then we have our own motivation and engagement within the process itself. So let's look at fear of failure first. When we think about fear of failure, we notice there that about 52% of people will avoid stretch goals or stretch projects because of self-doubt. We just don't know whether we are able to do it, right? It's a stretch. It is something where we will have to step out of our comfort zone. And then we don't. We don't because we don't want to take that risk. Now, if you think about our psychological safety, if we don't have any, or we are in an environment that's very toxic, of course I don't want to take a risk. I don't want to put myself at risk. And then I'm not going to step into those stretch projects, because what happens if I fail? Will people laugh at me? Will I get fired? Worst case scenarios? What happens? Right? So in our environment, that's why the external things are very important to look at and understand how they contribute. And we also need to understand how we feel internally ourselves about failing, and how confident we feel to do something or try something out, right? So understanding that is definitely a good step for us individually to sort of go, okay, I do feel confident about this, but I potentially don't want to fail in this environment, but I might want to fail in other environments. So how might that look like for me as a human? Then we have the mismatching of our roles and our skills. Now, this might happen in a variety of different ways. We might step into a space where we are still fairly new. We have a lot of book knowledge, but we don't necessarily have all of the practical skills there yet. Or we might have moved from one industry to another industry, and it looks a little bit different. And the skills that we already have only covers maybe 50% of the work that we are doing. So there's a variety of reasons why the roles and the skills that we have doesn't necessarily fully match up. Not saying that you have 100% mismatch, but there might be some areas that they don't match up. So one of those things that can cause us to be in that situation is that we don't really have clarity on our career path. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have clarity on your career path. It is one of those clarity things, again, where it makes it a little bit easier if we know what direction we are going towards. For ourselves as an individual, understanding our own purpose, our own values, and what we want to create in the world. That's an internal conversation. It is potentially a conversation that you can have with your team members, and I would encourage that, because that helps you to understand what it is that they need and where they are at. And it is a conversation we have to have with ourselves individually as well, so that we can understand where we are at. Then we can also, the other problem, have within that mismatch of roles and skills, that we have trainings, really great trainings that's being presented by the organization, but it's not relevant to what we actually need, right? The organization might have identified that they need to upskill leaders in business acumen, for instance. And wonderful, that is helpful. And maybe I need to just learn how to communicate properly with people. Now, is that in my business acumen training? No, most likely not. And that then is not necessarily a relevant skill. I would have benefited more from communications training and understanding how to do that properly versus business acumen training. So that brings us to the last point within that mismatch of roles and skills, where we need to personalize our own training. So thinking about how you train, what it is that you do, and how that actually works towards your career. See, clarity on career makes a big difference. Then we come to that last one, which is motivation and engagement. Now, our own personal motivation and engagement, understanding our purpose, and being able to step up into those spaces where I can start to learn, I'm being engaged within the process, and I am not waiting for somebody to invite me in. Because guess what? Your growth as an individual is your job, not your leaders, not the organizations. They can provide you with some of the things that you might need, but stepping up for it and actually doing it, still your job. You're the only one that can do that, no matter how many trainings the organization provide you. So keep that in mind as that internal factor. Then, of course, we have the one where it's a little bit of a mix of both of them. One of those, so there's 3 again in that one. We have our learning and doing. Then we have time for learning, which I know a lot of people use as a very convenient excuse. And then we have our investment of resources and understanding which resources we actually need. So let's look at the learning doing sort of gap or paradox that we might have. In the neuroscience, they found that 10% of passive learning gets retained. So if you go and you do some online course, right, you will probably remember about 10% of that, if you're lucky. 75% of practical learning gets retained. So we want to make sure that we close this gap between passive and practical so that we have potentially, if we need to have some passive learning, yes, by all means, have the passive learning, and also make sure that we back it up with practical things so that we can see how do we apply this in our physical space so that we can close that gap and it actually sticks. So that's the first one there. Then we have our time for learning. Now, I am sure you are very, very aware of the fact that you might be running from one meeting to the next, 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 and then it's the end of the day. So where did you learn? One of the ways of learning is putting it in our structures, right? If you are in charge of meetings, please, 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 I beg you, put a learning cycle into your meeting. You will definitely benefit from it, as well as the rest of the people that enter your meeting. It becomes more significant. So what do I mean by entering a learning cycle into our meetings? Well, typically with a meeting, hopefully if you are doing this in a way that is productive, you have a meeting for a reason. That reason is an intent. You can find out from the rest of the people in your meeting what it is that they would most want to get out of said meeting. And then at the end of your meeting, you can ask them what is some new insights they might have gained throughout this time that you spent together. And only that question, what insights did you gain? What new insights did you gain from our time that we spent together, is already a mini learning cycle, because it makes you think about what happened and reflect on what is new for me. What is a new way of maybe thinking or looking at this? Or maybe I'm only seeing for the first time that this other department that I'm always struggling with is actually having the same sort of struggles that I do. So whatever the learning is that you have, there will be something. And as a leader, you can build it into your meetings. So please do. So a meeting is not an excuse not to learn. Then we also have prioritizations of development. As I mentioned before, it might be internal or external within that space, but making sure that we make it a priority for ourselves as well as those we lead. And then we have those lovely short-term performance sort of pressures. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Running like a headless chicken would go into that bucket. So when we have those short-term performance pressures, typically for most people, we just want to get the thing done and we do not focus on any learning whatsoever. We are still able to, however, utilize it as a learning opportunity, even within that space. So when you have one of those short-term pressures, one of the ways to go about putting some learning into that is to find out afterwards in a debrief after the pressure has been relieved a little bit. What did we learn? What worked really well? What didn't work so well, right? Find out from the rest of the team what they are seeing, how they experienced it. And next time when we have something similar, how can we do it differently? That's a learning cycle. Really easy. You start to see how learning is really, really easy if we only be very intentional about how we build it in. Then we have our last part, which is around our investing of resources. Now, typically, most organizations will have some form of training budget. And most of that training budget will go into some form of formal training where you go and you sit and you listen to somebody speak at the front of the room. Wonderful. You remember what I said early on? Only 10% of that you would be likely to retain. So we want to make sure that the learning that we do, the incentives that we have, and the way that we invest in those resources actually help us. So you can have structured programs, by all means. We need the information. And also make sure that for you personally, you go and look for somebody in your environment where you can learn from. So get a mentor. Right. Within that mentor-mentee space, you are able to learn from somebody that's been through the ringer a few times and they've seen a few things. It's very helpful. And then the last part is get a coach. And the reason why we want to get a coach is because they help us to see the things that we have learned, how we might physically apply them, how do we behave and be that way so that we are different in the way we approach life. And that is really where we start to integrate our learning. If we are not able to take the thing that we've learned and put it in practice, one, you won't retain it, and two, it's really a waste of money, time, effort, and everybody gets frustrated. So those are the factors to take into consideration when we think about our employee growth and why they might be struggling. So you now have a few places that you can look at and explore together, from the external to the internal, and potentially some of the things in the middle as well. And with that, I look forward to seeing all of you grow, and hopefully with a couple of tips and tricks, you might redesign the way that you do your learning within your space, as well as give your team the opportunity to do the same. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you all back here soon. And of course, if there's anything else that you wonder about regarding to learning, you can contact me on my email, which is mariska@journey2discover.com. Alternatively, you can go to my website, which is journey2discover.com, also with the number. Or you can also find me on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, you can literally write me a message and we can start our conversation that way. Of course, we also have loads and loads of wonderful resources on our YouTube channel. So do subscribe to the USA Global TV and Radio YouTube channel and go and have a bit of a browse with all the shows and the lovely talking heads that we have available for you. And with that, I will then see you next time around. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honoured to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USA Global TV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, we're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Music by Johnny Dies. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative Direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Copyright 2025. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.